So now we started working with our custom hook. That now also means we can clean up this component a bit, remove some of the code we had in there before, basically everything we commented out there. Now for add ingredient handler, you will also see that we're getting a warning here. There are some green squiggly lines that we're missing a dependency, send request, and indeed, we should add this here. Now add ingredient handler, the same as with remove ingredient handler, send request, thankfully, is wrapped in use callback in our custom hook here. And therefore, this will not rebuild or will not be recreated for every rebuild of the component. And therefore, remove ingredient handler, which also uses use callback, is not recreated. And hence, our optimizations of child components stay intact. And what we're not handling is errors or clearing errors. That's not something we're doing. We want to do that with the help of our custom hook here as well. Now we're setting an error here if we're getting one, but we got no way of clearing it. I will actually register a new case in my reducer in my custom hook, which I'll name clear. And there, I'll return a new object. And essentially what I do there is I'll just return this new initial state. So I'll cut it here, create a new constant up there. Maybe name this initial state, sounds like a fitting name, and that is just this object. And then here, in the clear case, I simply return this initial state object from above. And it's the same initial state object which we can use down there for initializing the reducer. Whoops, and we need no curly braces here. And therefore, we can get rid of that old clear case. The new one does the resetting we want. Now, clear is something we can dispatch, but we're never dispatching it anywhere here. So I'll create a new function here inside of my custom hook, clear, or whatever you want to name it. It's a pretty straightforward function which uses dispatch HTTP and dispatches an action where the type simply is clear. No data needs to be appended, nothing like that. I'll also use callback here to avoid that this gets re-rendered. We got no external dependencies, so this is an empty array. And now clear is a function which we can also return here. So I'll return clear as a key value pair in that object we're returning overall from our custom hook. And now in our component, we can get access to clear by simply extracting this as well as a property from our use HTTP result, so from our custom hook. And now in clear error down there, all we have to do is we call clear like this, or we get rid of clear error here entirely. And down there on close of the error modal, we just point at clear, which is that extracted function we're getting from our custom hook, which is already wrapped in use callback. So now let's test whether that works by going again to the delete handler, removing the S here to force an error, log in, click on bananas. That's looking good. We can handle this. We can hopefully still add new apples. So that's all working. If I fix the error, of course, deleting will also work again. So if I delete my apples, that's looking good. So now we're using the custom hook here. Now another place where we can, of course, use it is the search component. In the search component, we're also sending a HTTP request. So there's no reason to not also use the hook there. To use it here, I will import it, of course, use HTTP from hooks HTTP.js, and then just as before, call use HTTP up there, and then extract some data from there, which we're interested in. Now that might be less data than before. I'll keep it a bit simpler here. I'm interested in loading, I'm interested in data, I'm interested in potential errors, and I want to be able to send my requests. Since I handle errors, I also need the clear function. And now with all of that extracted, we want to send a request here where we previously called fetch. So I'll call send request here, and my URL is of course the same thing I had here before, so URL plus query. Method here is get, it's a get request. We need no body, we need no request extra. We also need no identifier because in this component, this is the only request we're sending, so we will always be able to identify it. And hence we can get rid of all that logic here. I will keep that transformation logic because we'll need this in a second. And I will just cut this here. So now, for now, I'm just sending the request here. If we decide that the time is ripe. Now to handle the response, I'll again use another useEffect call. By the way, the position, the order of the useEffect calls doesn't matter here. And this should of course execute whenever we got data, but it will also depend on loading and on an error. Because in here, I want to check if we are not loading and we have no error and we have data, let's say, then if that's the case, then we know we got some data back. Here I will now add this transformation logic. Response data is now just the data we got back. So we can simply replace the response data with data. And then we call onLoadIngredients. Now onLoadIngredients, therefore, of course, also is a dependency here. Oops, onLoadIngredients. That's also a dependency we need to add because we're calling it here. Now in the first useEffect call here, we depend on entered filter, we depend on the ref, of course, we depend on no more onLoadIngredients, but instead we now have a new dependency which is sendRequest, so we should add this because we're using this function here. And functions are normal dependencies, just like other values. Since it's wrapped in useCallback in our custom hook though, it will not trigger another call of useEffect, and that's exactly what should be the case. So now last but not least, we're doing all of that. Let's now also add error handling here. For that, I'll import the error modal from UI error modal. And if I now go down to the JSX section here, above that card, I'll check error if it's there. If we do have an error, I will render the error modal. And in the error modal, whoops, that should be 2 ampersand signs. In the error modal, I want to output my error then, which is the message. And on close of that modal, I want to call clear, right? Which is my clear function coming from my custom hook, which I'm extracting here. So now this is all being done here. Now to also show a little loading indicator, let's say between the label and the input, I'll not add the loading spinner here. It would actually distort the interface. Instead, I'll just check for is loading. And if that's the case, then I want to output a span with the text loading in there. If we save that and we log in, you see loading here as a text. And you also see this if I type here and then await. Like this. And therefore, this seems to work correctly. And if we check the network tab, we also see no infinite amount of requests there. Let's add some apples and then update the filter here. So that's all looking pretty good to me. And now we're using the custom hook also in the search component.